Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The crystalline spires of the Villani Imperial Palace reached toward twin suns, their surfaces refracting rainbow light across marble floors where no footsteps echoed. In the highest tower, Princess Kira sat alone by a window she could not see. Through, her pale blue fingers tracing patterns on the cool stone sill. Born to rule an empire that spanned 3 star systems, she had instead become its most carefully hidden shame. The genetic lottery that granted other Villani their luminous skin and towering height had been cruel to Kira. Her eyes, clouded white, from birth, had never glimpsed the beauty her people prized above all else. Her legs, thin and weak, could barely support her weight. In a society that valued physical perfection as a divine blessing, she was living proof that even royalty could be cursed. "The human delegation arrives today," announced Nara, her lone servant, voice carefully neutral. "Your father requests you. Remain in your chambers during the negotiations." Kira's laugh held no humor. "Of course he does. Can't have the mighty Villani Empire's dirty secret greeting our potential allies." She turned her head toward the window, feeling warmth from the suns on her face. "Tell me, Nara, what do the humans look like? Are they as beautiful as we are?" Nara hesitated. "They are different, Princess. Smaller. Their skin comes in many shades, and they move with less grace. But there is something in their eyes, a determination that seems almost fierce." 3 floors below, Ambassador Marcus Chen stepped from his transport craft, his weathered face creased with concentration as he reviewed his mission parameters. Humanity needed this alliance. The Korthak war fleet was spreading across the galaxy like a plague, and the Villani military technology could tip the balance. He had studied their culture extensively, learned their customs, prepared for every diplomatic nuance. What he had not prepared for was the sound that drifted down from the tower above, a voice raised in song, hauntingly beautiful, filled with a loneliness that made his chest tight. The melody was alien, yet it spoke of universal themes: isolation, hope, the yearning for connection. "Ah, you hear the cursed one," said Chancellor Drom, the Villani official escorting him. His tone dripped with distaste. "Pay it no mind, Ambassador. Some mistakes are best forgotten." Marcus stopped walking. "Cursed one, our Emperor's disappointment. Born wrong, weak. She brings shame to our bloodline, but tradition forbids us from ending her misery. We keep her out of sight, as is proper." The casual cruelty in the Chancellor's voice sparked something dangerous in Marcus's chest. He had read about human emotional responses in stressful diplomatic situations, how their empathy could become a liability. But hearing that voice, thinking of someone suffering alone while their own family called them a mistake, he found himself caring less about protocol and more about basic decency. "I see," he said carefully, filing the information away. The negotiations began poorly. The Villani were arrogant, dismissive of human military capabilities, and seemed more interested in extracting tribute than forming a true alliance. But Marcus found his attention drifting upward, toward that tower where a voice had touched something deep in his soul. During a recess, he excused himself and made his way through corridors lined with portraits of perfect Villani rulers. Each face was flawless, radiant, posed to showcase their species' ethereal beauty. The contrast with the hidden princess above was stark and intentional. He climbed the tower stairs, ignoring the startled protests of servants. At the top, he found an unlocked door and stepped into a chamber filled with books, musical instruments, and tactile art pieces. In the center sat a young woman whose beauty was different from the portraits below, quieter, more fragile, but somehow more real. Kira turned toward the sound of his footsteps, her blind eyes wide with surprise. "Who dares enter the shame tower?" "Someone." "Who thinks shame belongs to those who would hide such a beautiful voice?" Marcus said softly. "Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." For the first time in years, Princess Kira smiled. Marcus had expected many things from his diplomatic mission to the Villani Empire. Complex negotiations, cultural misunderstandings, perhaps even subtle insults about human inferiority. He had not expected to find himself sitting cross-legged on the floor of a tower room, completely captivated by a princess his host pretended did not exist. "You should not be here," Kira said, though her tone suggested she hoped he would stay. Her fingers moved constantly, tracing patterns on her dress or exploring the textures of objects within reach. "If my father discovers a human in my chambers, it will end your alliance negotiations." "Maybe some things are more important than alliances," Marcus replied, watching how she tilted her head to catch every nuance in his voice. "Besides, I'm not getting very far with your father anyway. He seems to think humans are barely evolved enough to serve as cannon fodder against the Korthak." Kira's laugh was like silver bells. "Father believes anything not Villani is inherently inferior. He has never bothered to learn about other species beyond what military intelligence provides." She paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "But you came here, to my tower. Why?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. In diplomatic training, they had taught him to measure every word, to calculate the impact of each revelation. But something about Kira's presence made such calculated responses feel like betrayals. "I heard you singing," he said simply, "and someone called you cursed. Where I come from, we have a saying. The most beautiful flowers often grow in the harshest conditions." "You think I am beautiful?" The question was barely a whisper. "I think you are remarkable." Over the following days, Marcus found excuses to visit the tower. He told himself it was cultural research. Understanding all levels of Villani society would surely help his negotiations. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. He was drawn to Kira like a moth to flame. She told him stories her tutors had shared before her family decided education was wasted on the defective princess. Her mind was sharp, her understanding of galactic politics surprisingly sophisticated despite her isolation. She had learned to read through raised symbols pressed into metal sheets, had memorized entire libraries worth of information. "The Korthak. Expansion follows a pattern," she explained one afternoon, her fingers tracing star charts she had recreated from memory in raised clay. "They target systems with specific resources, then establish supply lines through conquered territories. But there are gaps in their strategy, vulnerabilities my military advisors refuse to see because they consider the source unreliable." Marcus leaned forward, studying her work. The clay map was incredibly detailed, showing trade routes and military positions with startling accuracy. "This is brilliant tactical analysis. Why hasn't anyone in the Imperial Court seen this?" Kira's expression darkened. "Because it came from the cursed princess. In Villani culture, physical perfection reflects spiritual worth. My blindness and weakness mark me as spiritually corrupt, so my thoughts are considered tainted." She crushed a section of the clay map, her controlled facade cracking. "They would rather lose battles than accept wisdom from someone like me." The pain in her voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had read about human emotional responses to injustice, how their species had evolved to feel distress when witnessing unfairness, even among strangers. But this felt more personal, more intense than simple evolutionary programming. "On Earth," he said quietly, "we have leaders who cannot walk, scientists who cannot see, artists who cannot hear. We learned long ago that a person's worth has nothing to do with their physical form." "Earth sounds like a wonderful dream," Kira whispered. "It could be your reality." The words hung between them, dangerous and full of possibility. Marcus knew he was crossing lines that could destroy his mission, but looking at Kira, seeing the brilliant mind trapped by prejudice, the gentle soul wounded by cruelty, he found himself willing to risk everything. Their friendship deepened with each stolen conversation. Marcus brought her news from beyond the palace walls, descriptions of other worlds and species. Kira shared insights about Villani history and culture that no diplomatic briefing had ever revealed. Together, they created a bond that transcended species, circumstance, and the vast differences in their backgrounds. But in the Villani court, secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. The summons came at dawn. delivered by guards whose crystalline armor reflected the early light like prisms. Marcus had been expecting this confrontation since he first climbed the tower stairs, but the reality still sent ice through his veins. As he was escorted to the throne room, Emperor Valen sat on a seat carved from a single massive crystal, his perfect features arranged in an expression of cold fury. Chancellor Drom stood beside him, barely containing his satisfaction. Around the hall, court officials whispered among themselves, their luminous eyes fixed on the human who had dared breach their most carefully guarded shame. "Ambassador Marcus," the Emperor's voice echoed through the vast chamber. "We are told you have been visiting our daughter without permission. Is this true?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, drawing on every lesson in diplomatic composure he had ever learned. "I have spoken with Princess Kira, yes. She is remarkably intelligent and—" "She is cursed," Emperor Valen interrupted, rising from his throne. "A blight upon our bloodline that we tolerate only out of duty to tradition. That you would seek her company suggests either profound ignorance of our customs or deliberate insult to our house. With respect, Your Majesty, I find Princess Kira to be one of the most insightful individuals I have ever encountered. Her analysis of galactic politics is—" "Enough!" The Emperor's shout made crystal fixtures throughout the hall ring like bells. "You will have no further contact with the Cursed One. You will confine your activities to official diplomatic functions. Any violation of this command will result in the immediate termination of all alliance negotiations." Marcus felt the weight of his entire species' future pressing down on him. Humanity needed this alliance. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Yet the image of Kira sitting alone in her tower, punished further for his friendship, made his chest burn with helpless rage. "I understand, Your Majesty," he said through gritted teeth. 3 floors above, Kira pressed her ear against her chamber door, listening to the barely audible murmur of conversation from below. Nara had told her about the summons, the guards, the Emperor's fury. She did not need sight to understand what was happening. When Nara returned hours later, her footsteps were heavier than usual. "Well?" Kira asked, though she already knew the answer. "The human has been forbidden from seeing you. Your father has also restricted your movements further. Guards will be posted outside your door. Your meals will be delivered. But you are not to leave this chamber under any circumstances." Kira sank into her chair by the window, feeling the weight of isolation settle around her like a shroud. For a few precious days, she had tasted friendship, intellectual stimulation, the simple joy of being valued for her mind, rather than dismissed for her body. Now even that small light was being extinguished. "It is my fault," she whispered. "I should have turned him away." "Princess," Nara said gently, "the human looked pained when he left the throne room. I do not think he regrets knowing you, but regret and reality were different things." In the days that followed, Kira heard nothing from Marcus. The negotiations continued below, growing more heated with each session. Through servants' gossip, she learned that the alliance talks were failing. The Vellani demanded too much tribute. The humans offered too little military support. Both sides grew increasingly frustrated with the other's perceived arrogance. Marcus threw himself into his diplomatic duties with grim determination, but his heart was no longer in the careful dance of interstellar politics. Every proposal he made was colored by thoughts of Kira's tactical insights. Every Vellani dismissal of human capabilities reminded him of how they dismissed their own daughter. He found himself growing shorter with the Emperor's demands, less willing to accept casual insults about human inferiority. "Your species lacks the refined intelligence necessary for true partnership," Chancellor Drom declared during one particularly tense session. "Perhaps you would be better served seeking alliance with the primitive worlds of the Outer Rim." "Refined intelligence," Marcus repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Like the intelligence that keeps a brilliant strategic mind locked in a tower because she doesn't fit your aesthetic preferences." The throne room fell silent. Emperor Valen's face darkened to a shade that would have been impressive if it were not so terrifying. "You forget yourself, human." "No, Your Majesty. I think I'm finally remembering exactly who I am." The alliance negotiations collapsed that afternoon. Marcus was given 24 hours to leave Vellani space, his mission a complete failure. As he prepared his ship for departure, He stared up at the tower where a lonely princess sat surrounded by guards, cut off from the universe by her family's cruelty. He could not save the Alliance. He could not save his species from the coming war. But perhaps before he left, he could save one brilliant soul who deserved so much better than the fate her birth had given her. The question was whether she would be willing to leave everything she had ever known for a chance at freedom among the stars. The Korthak war fleet struck the outer colonies while Marcus was still in hyperspace, fleeing the wreckage of his diplomatic mission. The news reached him through emergency broadcasts that painted a grim picture: entire worlds going dark, defense, fleets scattered like leaves in a storm, refugees streaming toward the inner systems, with tales of unimaginable destruction. Marcus changed course immediately, racing back toward Earth to help coordinate the desperate defense efforts. But even as his ship cut through the void at maximum acceleration, his thoughts kept returning to a tower room on Vellani Prime, where a brilliant mind sat imprisoned by prejudice. On Vellani Prime, the news of the Korthak advance reached the Imperial Palace through official military channels. Emperor Valen convened his war council immediately, the crystalline chamber filling with the Empire's finest military minds, as they studied tactical displays and argued over response strategies. The Korthak moved faster than anticipated, General, Torn announced, his perfect features creased with concern. They have bypassed our forward observation posts and are advancing directly toward the core systems. At their current pace, they will reach Vellani space within 15 days. Impossible, Chancellor Drom declared. Our intelligence indicated they would need at least 30 days to consolidate their positions and establish supply lines. Their intelligence was flawed, the general replied grimly. They are not following conventional invasion patterns. This is something new, something we have not seen before. 3 floors above, Kira listened to the distant sounds of urgent activity echoing through the palace corridors. Servants rushed past her door, their footsteps quick with fear. Guards changed shifts more frequently, their armor clanking with nervous energy. Even without sight, she could sense the growing panic that gripped the imperial court. When Nara brought her evening meal, the servant's hands shook as she set down the tray. "What news from the War Council?" Kira asked. "Bad news, Princess. The Korthak have taken 12 systems in 3 days. They move like nothing our generals have ever seen." Nara's voice dropped to a whisper. "Some say they will be here within 2 weeks. Kira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the tower's stone walls. She had studied the Korthak extensively, analyzing their expansion patterns from historical records and military reports. What the generals saw as unprecedented aggression, she recognized as something far more sophisticated. "They are not moving randomly," she murmured to herself. "This is coordinated, planned. They know something our military does not." Over the following days, as reports from the front grew increasingly desperate, Kira found herself constructing mental maps of the Korthak advance. Her fingers traced patterns on clay tablets, recreating star charts from memory and plotting enemy movements with growing certainty. The Korthak were not simply overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers. They were targeting specific systems in a precise sequence, each conquest opening pathways to resources and strategic positions that would accelerate their next advance. It was brilliant, terrifying, and completely misunderstood by the Vellani military leadership. "They think this is a conventional invasion," she whispered to her empty chamber, "but it is something far more dangerous." Meanwhile, the palace buzzed with increasingly frantic activity. The Emperor called emergency sessions, demanded reports from every military commander, and grew more desperate with each passing hour. The mighty Vellani Empire, masters of 3-star systems and possessors of technology that made them the envy of lesser species, found themselves helpless before an enemy they could not understand. In her tower prison, Kira felt the weight of knowledge she could not share. She had identified the pattern, understood the strategy, even developed potential countermeasures. But she was the cursed princess, the mistake hidden away from public view. Her insights would be dismissed as the ravings of a defective mind. The irony was bitter beyond bearing. The empire that had discarded her as worthless now faced destruction because they refused to listen to the one person who might save them, Onduwei. The seventh day of the crisis, as Korthak forces penetrated deeper into Villani territory, Kira made a decision that would have terrified her just weeks earlier. She began to sing, not the lonely melodies that had filled her chamber for years, but the ancient war songs of her people, the rallying cries that had once united Villani warriors against impossible odds. Her voice carried through the tower, down, the corridors into the very heart of the palace, where her father struggled to save an empire. He barely understood how to defend. It was a voice that demanded attention, commanded respect, and refused to be ignored any longer. The cursed princess was finally ready to claim her birthright, not as a ruler of ceremony and tradition, but as the strategic mind her people desperately needed. The question was whether anyone would be wise enough to listen before it was too late, and somewhere in the depths of space, racing toward Earth with news of his failed mission, Marcus received an encrypted message that would change everything. The Villani Empire was under attack. Alliance negotiations had resumed under emergency protocols, and Princess Kira had requested his immediate return. The galaxy's fate now hung on the bond between a human diplomat and an alien princess that neither of their peoples fully understood. Marcus's ship dropped out of hyperspace to find the Villani home system transformed. Military vessels crowded the approaches to Villani Prime, their crystal hulls gleaming like deadly jewels against the star field. Defense platforms bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Yet the mood among the fleet was one of barely controlled panic rather than confident strength. The emergency diplomatic channel crackled to life as soon as his ship was detected. Chancellor Drom's voice, stripped of its usual arrogance, filled the cockpit with desperate urgency. "Ambassador Marcus, thank the stars you have returned. The Emperor requests your immediate presence in the War Council. We need human assistance. To understand our enemy." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. The same officials who had dismissed humanity as primitive cannon fodder now begged for help against an enemy they could not comprehend. But his amusement died when he thought of Kira, trapped in her tower while her world burned around her. The palace was a hive of frantic activity. Military officers rushed through corridors that had once echoed with ceremonial dignity, their perfect features marred by exhaustion and fear. In the war room, Emperor Valen stood before a massive holographic display showing the steady advance of Korthak forces, like red cancer spreading across the galaxy. "Marcus," the Emperor said without preamble, "your people have fought the Korthak before. We need to understand their tactics, their weaknesses, their—" "Your Majesty," Marcus interrupted. "With respect, I am not a military strategist, but I know someone who is." Valen's expression darkened. "If you mean to suggest we consult with—" "Princess Kira has been studying Korthak expansion patterns for years. She has identified strategic vulnerabilities that your generals have missed. She could save your empire if you would let her." The war room fell silent, except for the humming of tactical displays. General Torn stepped forward, his luminous eyes blazing with indignation. "You ask us to take military advice from the Cursed One? A blind, crippled, a brilliant mind that you have been too proud to utilize," Marcus cut him off. "While you have been planning for conventional warfare, she has been analyzing the enemy's true strategy. The Korthak are not just invading, they are implementing a systematic deconstruction of galactic civilization, and she knows how to stop them." Emperor Valen struggled visibly with himself, pride warring against desperation. Outside, alerts chimed, as another outer system fell to Korthak forces. Time was running out, and conventional solutions had already failed. "Bring her," he said finally, the words seeming to physically pain him. Marcus climbed the tower stairs two at a time, his heart racing with something that might have been hope. He found Kira sitting by her window, her blind eyes turned toward E. Sounds of battle preparation echoing from the courtyard below. "You came back," she said softly. "I made a promise. Besides, your empire needs you." Kira's laugh was bitter. "My empire has spent 20 years making it clear how little it needs me." That was before they faced an enemy they could not understand. "Kira, you have to come with me. They need your knowledge of Korthak tactics. And if I refuse, if I let them face the consequences of their prejudice—" Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Then billions of innocent people die because their leaders were too proud to listen. You are not responsible for their mistakes, but you might be the only one who can prevent a catastrophe. Kira was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on his palms as she considered. Finally, she stood with careful dignity. Very well, but I will need your help to navigate their technology. My other senses are sharp, but their displays are designed for sight. Together they descended to the war room, where the assembled military leadership waited with barely concealed reluctance. Kira entered with her head held high, her blindness and frail form making her seem delicate among the towering Vellani warriors. But when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute knowledge. "You are fighting the wrong war," she announced. "The Korthak are not trying to conquer territory. They are dismantling the infrastructure that holds galactic civilization together. Every system they take serves a specific purpose in weakening the next target." She moved to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across surfaces she could not see while Marcus described the images to her in low, precise words. Within minutes, she had identified patterns that had eluded the Empire's finest military minds. "Here," she said, pointing to a seemingly random cluster of systems. "They will strike here next, not because these worlds are militarily important, but because their destruction will create refugee streams that will overwhelm the defensive systems of these three core worlds." General Torn studied the display with growing amazement. "If you are correct, then all our defensive preparations have been positioned in the wrong locations." "I am correct," Kira said simply. "The question is whether you are willing to trust the cursed princess with your empire's survival." For the first time in 20 years, Emperor Valen looked at his daughter not with shame, but with something approaching respect. The galaxy's fate now rested in the hands of the princess he had tried so hard to hide from the world. The Korthak strike fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where Princess Kira had predicted, their dark ships sliding through the void like predators sensing wounded prey. The Vellani Defense Force, repositioned according to her strategic analysis, waited in formations that conventional military doctrine would have deemed impossible. In the palace war room, Kira sat before a modified tactical display that translated visual information into tactile feedback and audio cues. Her fingers danced across raised surfaces, while Marcus provided rapid verbal descriptions of the unfolding battle, his voice tight with concentration. "Enemy vessels are maintaining formation Delta 7, he reported. 3 capital ships at Muam. The center, destroyer screens extending in a defensive sphere. They expect us to attack the capital ships directly," Kira murmured, her mind racing through tactical calculations. "Instead, target the destroyers here and here." Her fingers identified specific points on the display. "Those vessels carry their communication relays. Blind them first, then exploit the confusion." Emperor Valen, standing beside his daughter, for the first time in years, relayed her orders to the fleet commanders. The results were immediate and devastating. Korthak ships, suddenly cut off from their coordination network, began making tactical errors that Vellani forces exploited with surgical precision. But the space battle was only the beginning. Long-range sensors detected a second wave of enemy ships approaching the system's edge, and these carried the dreaded Korthak ground assault forces. If they reached Vellani Prime's surface, even victory in space would be meaningless. "We need to activate the planetary defense grid," General Torn announced. "The old shield generators built into the planet's crust during the ancient wars." "Those systems have been offline for centuries," Chancellor Drom protested. "The activation codes were lost generations ago." Kira's head turned sharply toward the conversation. "Not lost, hidden. In the deep archives beneath the palace, there are records that predate digital storage. Stone tablets carved with the old, ways preserved by scholars who understood that some knowledge should never be forgotten." "The archives are sealed," the Emperor said. "The passages are too narrow for our people to navigate safely, and the locking mechanisms require precise manipulation that only someone with enhanced tactile senses could manage." Marcus finished, understanding immediately. "Someone who has learned to see with their hands." Kira stood with quiet determination. "I can reach the archives, but I will need guidance through the mechanical systems, someone who can translate alien technology." into concepts I can understand. The risk is too great, Emperor Varlan said, and for the first time in years his voice carried parental concern rather than royal disappointment. The passages are unstable, the mechanisms are ancient and dangerous. Father, Kira said, and the word carried 20 years of pain and longing. This is what I was born to do, not to sit in a tower being beautiful, but to use the gifts the universe gave me to protect our people. Marcus stepped forward. I'll go with her. Human physiology is more adaptable to confined spaces, and I can interface with alien technology in ways that might complement her abilities. The journey to the deep archives took them through passages that had not been disturbed for centuries. Ancient stone gave way to metal corridors filled with the humming of machines that predated the current empire. Kira moved through the darkness with confidence, her enhanced hearing and touch guiding them past pitfalls that would have claimed sighted travelers. Here, she whispered, her hands finding hidden mechanisms in what appeared to be solid wall. The locking sequence requires pressure applied in specific patterns, while rotating these cylinders in sequence. Marcus watched in amazement as her fingers worked with precision that bordered on artistry, finding pressure points by touch and manipulating ancient technology through pure intuition. The walls slid aside to reveal a chamber filled with stone. Tablets covered in raised symbols, the defense codes, Kira breathed, her hands moving across the tablets with reverent care. But they are incomplete. The activation sequence is split across multiple locations, hidden to prevent any single person from commanding such devastating power. Above them, the battle for the planet's survival continued. Korthak ground forces had broken through the outer defenses and were advancing toward population centers. Time was running out, and the ancient shields remained dormant in the planet's depths. There, Marcus said, studying a wall inscription his translator could barely decipher. It says the remaining codes are in the ceremonial chambers beneath the throne room, but the path is blocked by security systems that require— He paused, checking his translation. Royal blood and the trust of one who sees without sight. Kira smiled, understanding immediately. The ancient builders had known that some dangers could only be faced by those who combined royal authority with wisdom born from adversity. They had created a system that could only be activated by someone exactly like her. Come, she said, taking Marcus's hand. Let us save an empire that never believed it needed saving. Together, they raced through ancient corridors toward a destiny that would redefine what it meant to be worthy of a crown. The ceremonial chambers beneath the throne room had been sealed for so long that dust motes danced in the light of Marcus's hand-held illuminator, like ancient spirits disturbed from eternal rest. Kira moved through the space with reverent care, her enhanced senses reading the history written in stone and metal around them. The builders of these systems understood something my people have forgotten, she said, her fingers tracing intricate carvings that told the story of the Villani Empire's founding. True strength comes not from perfection, but from the wisdom to use every gift the universe provides. The final control chamber was a marvel of ancient engineering, its walls covered with symbols that seemed to shift and flow in the uncertain light. At the center stood a pedestal supporting a crystalline interface that pulsed with dormant energy, waiting for the proper combination of genetic recognition and conscious intent. Above them, the battle raged with increasing desperation. Through the communication link to the war room, they could hear the grim reports flooding in. Korthak forces had overwhelmed the outer cities and were advancing toward the capital. The space battle had turned in the Villani favor, but ground-based weapons were systematically destroying orbital assets that fell within range. Princess, General Torn's voice crackled through the comm unit. We estimate 15 minutes before enemy forces reach the palace district. If the shields are to be activated, it must be now. Kira approached the ancient interface, her blind eyes reflecting the crystal's pulsing light. She placed her hands on the smooth surface and felt the system respond to her genetic signature, awakening from centuries of slumber. But the activation sequence required more than royal bloodline. It demanded understanding of systems that predated modern technology. I can feel the pathways, she whispered, her fingers exploring the crystal's surface. But the control patterns are three-dimensional, extending through multiple layers. I need someone who can see the connections I cannot touch. Marcus studied the interface, his human perception processing the alien technology in ways that complemented Kira's tactile abilities. There are light patterns beneath the surface, neural pathways that mirror the movements of your hands. If I can guide your movements while you feel for the proper responses. They work together with desperate precision, Marcus describing the flow of energy beneath the crystal's surface, while Kira's enhanced touch found the proper pressure points and control sequences. It was a dance of trust and cooperation that transcended species, two minds working as one to unlock technology that had been designed for exactly this kind of partnership. The system awakened with a sound like singing crystal, energy coursing through conduits that stretched deep into the planet's core. Ancient shield generators buried beneath continents responded to commands that had not been given for 1,000 years, rising from their slumber to weave protective barriers around the world above. The effect was visible from space, a shimmering aurora that wrapped around Villani Prime like a celestial embrace. Korthic ships found their weapons useless against barriers that had been forged in the Empire's legendary past, while their ground forces discovered that their advance had been stopped by shields that rose from the very stones beneath their feet. In the war room above, Emperor Valen watched the tactical displays with amazement that bordered on awe. The daughter he had hidden in shame had accomplished what his finest generals could not. She had saved the Empire using gifts that existed, precisely because she was different from everyone else. "The Korthak forces are withdrawing," General Torn reported, his voice filled with wonder. "Their ships cannot penetrate the shields, and their ground forces are trapped between the barriers and our counter-attacking troops." But Kira barely heard, the celebration echoing through the palace corridors. In the deep chambers beneath the throne room, she leaned against Marcus with exhaustion that went beyond the physical. For the first time in her life, she had been truly needed, truly valued for who she was, rather than dismissed for who she was not. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Marcus smiled, helping her to stand as the crystal interface settled into a steady, peaceful glow. "Now you take your place as the strategic advisor your empire should have recognized years ago, and I formally request assignment as permanent human liaison to the Villani court. Even though I am still blind, still weak, still everything they called cursed. Especially because of that," Marcus said firmly. "The universe made you exactly as you needed to be for this moment. Your people are finally ready to understand that." Above them, Emperor Valen descended into the ancient chambers with steps that carried the weight of 20 years' worth of shame and regret. When he found his daughter standing beside the glowing crystal that had saved his empire, he knelt on stones that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I was so blinded by what I thought you should be that I could not see who you truly are." Kira reached down and touched her father's face, her fingers gentle against skin that bore the weight of imperial responsibility and parental failure. "There is nothing to forgive, Father. We are all products of the world that shaped us, but perhaps now we can build something better." In the months that followed, the Villani Empire underwent changes that would have been unthinkable before the Korthak crisis. Princess Kira was formally appointed as Chief Strategic Advisor. Her tower prison transformed into a center of learning, where the Empire's brightest minds came to study under someone who had learned to see possibilities others missed. The ancient ISO shield network, now fully operational under her guidance, became the foundation for a new kind of defense, one that protected not just the Villani homeworld, but allied systems throughout the galaxy. The technology was shared freely with species who had once been considered inferior, creating bonds of mutual protection that transformed the balance of galactic power. Marcus established the first human Villani cultural exchange center in the Aishi Palace's East Wing, where beings from both species worked together to develop new approaches to diplomacy, technology, and understanding. His relationship with Kira became the model for a new kind of interspecies cooperation, one based on complementary strengths rather than assumed superiority. But perhaps the most profound change was in how the Villani viewed difference itself. The empire that had once prized physical perfection above all else began to recognize that true strength came from diversity of thought, experience, and perspective. Schools were established to identify and nurture minds that thought differently, and the phrase cursed princess disappeared from the language entirely. Kira herself bloomed in ways that went beyond her official duties. No longer hidden away like a shameful secret, she became a voice for those who had been overlooked, dismissed, or discarded by societies that valued conformity over capability. Her story spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring countless beings who had been told they were less than whole. Standing on the balcony of her transformed chambers, feeling the warmth of twin suns on her face while listening to the sounds of a thriving city below, Kira reflected on the strange paths that had led her to this moment. She could not see the ships from a dozen worlds docked at the orbital stations above, but she could hear their diverse voices mixing in the streets, creating a symphony of cooperation that would have been impossible before. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, joining her on the balcony as he had so many times over the past year. Kira smiled, her blind eyes bright with contentment. "Only that it took a galactic crisis for my people to discover what humans apparently knew all along, that every being has value, regardless of how they appear to others." "Well," Marcus said, taking her hand as they listened to the sounds of a changing world, "sometimes the most important lessons take time to learn. The good news is that once learned, they tend to spread." Together they stood in comfortable silence, two unlikely friends who had helped reshape an empire and proven that the greatest bonds often form between the most different souls. In the distance, construction crews worked on new buildings designed to accommodate beings of all physical capabilities, while in the schools below, young Villani learned that diversity was not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be celebrated. The galaxy was still vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities that had not existed before. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that humanity had always understood. Every being, no matter how different they might appear, carries within them the potential to change the universe. The cursed princess had become the salvation of her people, and in doing so, had shown the galaxy that true nobility comes not from perfection, but from the courage to be exactly who you are meant to be.